I want to talk for a few minutes about, well, not only about a young man who was murdered, but how a truth has been suffocated, a people doubly imprisoned under the boot of occupation, under the shadow of terror from within and from without. Odai al-Rabi, a 22-year-old Palestinian from Gaza, who wasn't armed, who wasn't a militant, who wasn't engaged in espionage, who was guilty of something far more dangerous. He had a conscience. And for that, Hamas, the group that claims to defend his people, abducted, tortured and executed him, and his body was dumped on his family doorstep, a grotesque message accompanying it. This is the price for those who criticize Hamas. Over the weekend, on March 29th, Hamas's Al-Qassam brigades, ostensibly the resistance, dragged Odai from his home. He was beaten with iron rods, whipped, mutilated for 4 hours, and witnesses say he was paraded, blooded and bound by the neck, discarded like refuse in front of his grieving family. And his crime? Daring to join anti-Hamas protests in Gaza City and daring to speak publicly and peacefully for an end to war and tyranny. And these demonstrations were, of course, extraordinary. Rare public protests in Beit Lahia, Shujaya, Deir al-Balah, where Palestinians marched through rubble waving white flags, calling not for Israel's destruction but for Hamas's departure. And the slogans chanted were unequivocal. Hamas out. Our children's blood is not cheap. We want peace. And Odai was among them. It wasn't Fatah organised. It wasn't Western sponsored. It was grassroots, and the slogans were not about politics. They were about survival. And yet these protests were met not with dialogue, not with restraint, but with rope, rod and repression. And it tells you what Hamas is. This isn't new. Hamas, designated a terrorist organisation by the UK, the US and the EU, has consistently treated dissent as treason. Its kangaroo courts have sentenced alleged collaborators to death without trial. Its militias have executed political rivals and terrorised civilians. What is novel is that Gazans, after 16 months of relentless war and 50,000 dead, are no longer silent. The people Hamas purports to protect from the collective punishment are now its most potent critics. Odai's murder has become a rallying cry at his funeral. Thousands defied fear to chant in spirit and blood, "We will redeem you, Odai." His family, devout and dignified, declared he fasted Ramadan. He read the Quran. He was killed by unjust criminals who must face an iron fist. And the repression bears uncanny resemblance to the Kremlin's playbook, doesn't it? Dissidents poisoned in London, journalists defenestrated in Moscow, prosecutors jailed in their hundreds. Both regimes rely on violence and paranoia, silencing opposition in their own communities with brutality while claiming to represent national dignity. Much like Putin's Russia, Hamas cannot tolerate even the whiff of pluralism or protest. It rules not by consent but by coercion, a mafia with rocket launchers. The Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has used these protests as political capital, claiming they prove our strategy is working. The Defence Minister Katz went further, encouraging Gazans to rise up and framing protest as the path to peace. But Israel's campaign has killed thousands of civilians and turned Gaza to ash. The suffering is real, and for many Palestinians, Hamas is not a shield but a jailer, and Israel is not a liberator but a bombardier. To claim one form of brutality justifies another is morally obscene. But to ignore the internal terror Hamas inflicts on its own people, on people like Odai, is equally grotesque. In Gaza, dissent dies in silence. Hamas has muzzled the press, restricted mobile networks, punished those who dare to film or tweet. Qatari-owned Al Jazeera, often a mouthpiece for Hamas, has gone conspicuously quiet about this story. Protesters chanted, "Where are the journalists?" It's a haunting question and a damning indictment of selective outrage. This moment poses a challenge for the Western left. If your solidarity with Palestinians is genuine, if it is about human dignity and not merely about anti-Israel protests, then Odai al-Rabi must be your martyr too. To ignore this murder, to pretend that Hamas is somehow a legitimate resistance, is to betray the very people you claim to defend. Odai al-Rabi didn't die at the hands of Zionist forces or Israeli forces. He died at the hands of those who say they represent him. tortured by the very group that demands global sympathy and legitimacy, tortured by Hamas. We need to remember his name. We need to speak his truth. And above all, we must be clear. Gaza's liberation cannot and will not come through the barrel of Hamas's guns, nor through the silent complicity of those who excuse it. Hamas's suppression is required. But Israel's approach is wrong, and Hamas has demonstrated exactly how evil and how pernicious it is in the murder of this young man. It's not about which team you're on. Are you on Team Palestine or are you on Team Israel? You're on Team Truth. And Team Truth makes it very, very clear, I think. Hamas is an evil, appalling organization. That doesn't make Israel right. That doesn't make Netanyahu right, does it? Netanyahu has behaved abominably. And that doesn't justify Hamas. Hamas is a terrorist organization that conducted one of the worst terrorist attacks in recent years, in October, and killed innocent people and still holds them hostage. But Israel has pursued collective punishment for the actions of a small group. And thousands have died. Thousands have been killed in this obsession with justifying a war. And it must be wrong. Odai al-Rabi is somebody's name that should be on the front of all our newspapers. That should be the heading. But it isn't, and I find it extraordinary that the Times, the Telegraph, the Daily Mail, the Express, these British newspapers are quiet about the death of this young man. The BBC, quiet about his death. Shocking.